Hey everybody. So I'm going to demonstrate how to turn a branch into a tree. One of the things I like about making these is that even as a wood turner, like I find I'm using wood that no other woodworker wants anyway. This is a project that you can use that most wood turners don't even want. A couple reasons. I like to make them out of branches because then you get to keep some of the bark on the bottom. But you have to make sure they're dry, right? You can't just take a green branch and do this. Green branches make split trees. So, I mean, essentially it's a really simple spindle turning project. You know, I've seen a lot of different trees. You can see that I kind of have a style that I've fallen on here. One of the things that I go for is something that kind of looks like a tree. I've seen some people make these kind of squat, fat trees, and they just don't look like trees to me. So I kind of like this style a lot. But coming to this is you have to make a couple decisions along the way. And I'll talk about that while we're going here.
So why can't you trim them green?
Well, like I said, if you turn them green, you turn them out of a branch, it's got the pith in it, right? So you end up with some cracks, and sometimes they crack kind of cool. Sometimes it gives a little character. Sometimes, like this one, it goes right up the middle.
So how long should you let your wood dry?
Till it's dry enough, I guess, you know. So I'll start with something like this. This came out of my firewood pile. This is a piece of cherry. You know, since it's mostly, you know, a straight, you're making something that's straight up and down. You need a piece of the log that's straight enough. You see this has got a little curve to it. I'm actually going to turn it this way, and I'll use this as the tree, and then the base will be a little bit offset. So you'll see that I'll center it on this side, but on this side I'm not going to have mount it a little off center.
Did you want this on this?
Oh, it's on already.
It's on.
Yeah. So I start by, I already figured out where the centers are, but you know, I kind of like making them so they're not quite on center with the pith. You can see the grain, the way it, you can see the way the grain slopes away from one side. That's because it's not on center with the pith. So, first step's getting it mounted. Usually stick between centers like this. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's kind of a balance between aesthetics and where it's actually going to fit. You know, clearly I need the middle of this piece of wood. So let's see when I get it mounted over here. So basically, I just make a tenon so that I can grab. I'm going to put my jaws on here and grab it. You always want to plan for enough space. By the time I'm done, I'll cut it off of the piece that's mounted. So you want to leave yourself enough space here to have a tenon, and then after you're done with the tree, cut it off at the bottom there. I also find that this kind of live center with the little teeth in it is a lot better for this because you really want to pinch it, especially for that first part. And pinching it with the normal, just the conical live end tends to, because you're going in end grain, it'll split the logs out, especially if you've already got something that's got a little bit of a crack in it. So really one of the first things you have to figure out is, what's your tree going to look like? You know, tree has a trunk, tree has wider at the base, thinner at the top, you know. What are your dimensions going to be like? If you're going to keep the bottom, you have to decide where's the base going to start, where's the bottom, you know, where's the top of the trunk, that kind of thing. Usually just start with a parting tool, use that to like make a couple of spots, you know, like to mark off where those places are going to be. And then I'll start shaping the rest of the log. And a lot of times, at this point, I'll use the parting tool to kind of like hog out a little bit of the material. So this gives me a rough place to start. You know, like, okay, so the bottom of my tree is going to be here, and I want it to taper up this way, up to the top. Of course, like until the very last minute, I'm going to keep it between centers. So also have to remember that I'm going to sacrifice, you know, maybe a ½ inch of this end. You know, sometimes if there's a big crack in the end of the log, I want to sacrifice a little bit more. But I'm going to take this down a little bit. I'm not much for the skew. I really haven't had a lot of experience with it, so I use bowl gouge for this part of it. So at this point, I've got it mostly round. When I first started making these, I started planning out, okay, well, I want the branches to be, but then you have to hog out a bunch of material. So the thing that I've come to is get it to be round, know where you're going to start, and then think of the overall shape that you want the tree to be. So, like this guy's got, you know, this kind of conical shape. And so if I know that I'm going to go for that, the next thing I'm going to do is taper this down to a taper. And then I'll start planning out where these little, the different branches or boughs, or I don't know how you want to call that. here's about where I decide how many branches they're gonna have, how many, what's the spacing gonna be like. I personally think that odd numbers are really appealing to most people, so I usually tend to, on these sides of ones, I'll put 5. Like this one's got 4, a little less, seems a little less appealing to my eye, because it's got 4 in it. I think our eyes are drawn to things that have a middle, like there's the middle. So I'll do 5. I do some taller ones, that one's got 5 too, but just kind of depends on what the dimensions of the tree you're aiming for are going to look like. So the other thing to note is that when you look at this head on, there's not only this taper on the outside edge, but there's also the taper of the inside edge. Like it's a tree, right? The whole thing gets narrower as it goes higher up. So not only do I want this to be narrower as it goes up, but I want this space in between to get narrower, so it doesn't look like a fat log. I want it to kind of look like a tree.
Are those undercut?
Undercut?
The branches, are they undercut?
I did do that for a while, but I find it doesn't really matter. I've decided it's not worth my time to undercut them. You could probably undercut the base for a little bit more effect, but I don't know. I think they're just as appealing without the undercut. I do that more on the mushrooms that I make sure that there's that undercut in there. So this guy, this will be the bottom one, and we need to divide this into 4 more sections, right? We're gonna cut the end of this guy off. That'll be the waist on there. So I usually just do something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Darken up the lines a little bit. Kind of look at this. Throw my pencil on the floor. Yeah. So the spacing, you can go for even spacing. You can experiment with all kinds of different shapes. I found that I like this shape a lot, but I've made some where instead of this sort of straight conical shape, it's got like a little bit more curve to it. Gives it a little more whimsy, So, let's see.
So about 1/8 of an inch difference, that'd be enough each time?
I mean, it comes down to what you want the tree to look like, right? I mean, you can see the shape I've settled on, but if you look around, especially on YouTube, people make all kinds of stuff like this. I haven't seen a whole lot of people doing the live edge on the bottom. They'll take a whole, another chunk of wood that doesn't have any bark on it and start with that. I kind of like, I like the live edge a lot more. Yes, there's not any hard and fast rules. It's really just like, try and see what appeals to you. So since each one of these boughs is pretty much, straight cut in, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the parting tool and I'm going to cut in the bottoms of each of these layers. And that gives me a place as I'm working on cutting into this way, I know where I'm supposed to stop. So you notice I didn't touch this part. My experience has been the thinner you make this, if you make this thinner too soon, then you get a little bit more vibration. It's harder to get clean cuts all the way down into the bottom. So I'll kind of do this part almost very last. As well as I'll pull this, I'll remove some of the material for the trunk, but I won't take it down to its final thinness until a lot of the other cutting is done. So I'm going to switch to my spindle gouge. Honestly, this is about one of the only things I use spindle gouge for. I definitely need some more experience in other kinds of spindle turning, but So now I'll start working on the tree parts. Find it's really, to get a really nice cut, especially right on this edge, it can be kind of difficult. Actually, take it back and say it a different way. It's really easy to end up with a really jagged edge around here. And it has everything to do with how you get the spindle gouge to start right on that edge. So I do a lot of, like, you know, holding it on this side, keep making sure that, because the spindle gouge will want to go back this way, and that's where you end up with a bunch of, you know, torn out rough edges around there. And often I'll find that I'll cut a couple of them and then I'll realize that I want the proportions to be different. So I'll generally, like, I'm gonna stop there on that one, and after I taper this a little more, I might come back and reduce that one some more. Can't put wood back. So like I'm looking at this now and I'm like, that one's too fat. Like it really needs to come in a little more. It took me a long time to start looking at them this way and, you know, like look at it this way all day and then take it off later and go like, oh, I wish I had made that a little smaller or something. So I'm going to reduce that just a little bit. So I'm pretty happy with those proportions. You can see that there's like a couple of different ways that you can run these branches, right? You can start at the top and make them triangular, right? You know, but you can also have them slope down more, so they're like got a little more shape like that. There's also, you know, the way that you bring the edge down too. You can kind of round it off on the edge. You know.
You turn that around so the people over here can see the board turn.
Do that? That help?
Yeah, does that help over there? James?
When you get through, move to the other side. Sure. There you go.
You know, something like that. So, you know, I find like this to me is a little bit more whimsical. You know, like again, it comes down to your own personal taste. What you think looks good. So since I'm happy with the way these guys have gone, before I touch this last one, I'm going to get most of this material out and round off the base a little bit. For some reason, getting way deep in here, I find it a lot easier with the bowl gouge. I guess I should have mentioned this a second ago. Before I do the final cut, which that basically turned into the final cut, if the bark is something I want to keep, that's when I'll stick a bunch of CA glue on this side of the bark. Really just douse it in there, try to get it down in there, and then make that final cut. I think I'll actually take this off. I like it when the base rounds off a little bit. Sometimes I'll just hit it with the power sander. You see on some of these other ones where this edge is really rounded down so that you can kind of see this gradient of bark moving into the grain of the wood on the inside. Yeah, we'll think a couple things to clean up over there. So that's looking pretty good. I think I'll shape the top here, get it pretty close to the end, and then do a little bit of sanding, and then we're pretty close to done already, right? I don't know if you can tell, but it's already starting to wobble just a little bit. Not a huge deal, but this is usually when I stop, take a couple grits of sandpaper. Fine, even if you want the appearance of a sharp edge, nobody wants to handle a sharp edge. So I just round off the edges real good, a little sandpaper. What, grit?
Grit, yeah.
You know what's funny is I ran out of the normal stuff. I'm using this mesh stuff. I think it's just 150 and 220 or something like that. I find if you get enough, good enough, if you've got good wood and you get a good enough cut, 2 grits is enough. Most of these are all just sand with 2 grits.
So you have to put a finish on them or just natural?
I always put a finish on them, but I almost always just use oil, Mahoney's Walnut oil. I mean, I think there's very few kinds of wood that don't benefit from a little bit of finish, just color-wise.
So is that Mahoney oil we spent?
Yeah, and I brought some. I'll throw some on this one. So this seems a little scary. I found that this works pretty good. You get a longish piece of sandpaper and just let it hit all those edges. Yeah, so I'll do all that, get all whatever scratches that are, little grooves that are still in there, I'll get them out before I cut this end off. Once this end's off, depending on the species of wood, depending on how long it is, depending on a lot of things, sometimes once this is free, this is a really wobbly thing, and you're not going to get any more cuts out of it. You're not going to, even sanding sometimes is kind of a pain to get a good finish.
So do you always cut that tip off before you
got a gap in the back.
Will I cut this tip off? Oh yeah, yeah. I'll finish the cut with the lathe on. Yeah, like, so that's wobbling enough that I won't even try to do. I'll use some sandpaper to clean up the end of that. Yeah, and again, like the other sharp edges, like nobody wants a really, really pointy Christmas tree. Like doubles as a weapon. So I usually put the oil on when it's on the lathe, just easier that way. But I always, when I think I'm about ready to do that, stop lathe, check it out, make sure it really is done. Nothing like cutting something off the lathe and realizing that you could have done something easier, like a minute before you cut it off. There might just be enough oil in this from earlier today. Sometimes it's a little hard to get it down, all the way down into the crack down there. I find that the bark usually appreciates a little bit of oil too. Just darkens it up a little bit. Yeah, and then it's basically time to just cut it off the lathe. Right? Pretty simple, right? Now, I think I heard Arnie last month say something about this thing that I'm about to do. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to do this. It's pretty awkward, but I've gotten pretty good at it. I think what Arnie said was, learn to do this with your left hand. And I've tried a couple times and it hasn't gone very well. Need more practice. Yeah, parting tool. one thing that you can do right now is, usually when after I cut something off the lathe like this, and I'll take a power sander and I'll power sand the bottom of it to make it nice. In order to make this easily sit flat, like I've cut most of the way through, as you can see, but the rest of this I'm going to angle in just a little bit so that it's dished on the bottom, and that way instead of it like rocking and rolling, it's got like a flat base to sit on. But I'll also take a little bit of sandpaper right now because it's easier than doing it after you cut off the lathe. Stick it in here and round off this edge and sand it a little bit. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Clean up the bottom a little bit. Put a little bit of oil on the bottom too because it brings out that color. And there you go.
Hey, great job, buddy.